There you go. All right. Hey, we're live. Welcome to the Critical Christian Podcast.
We're your hosts, Dan
and Justin. We ask critical questions about the Bible, and we provide mostly questionable answers. But the key is that we're asking questions, and that's really what you need to do with these stories. You can't skim through them. This isn't Sunday school. You can't just gloss over it and say, cool. You got to dig into that thing. We're going to dig into chapter 45 this week.
Yeah, skimming.
Yeah, we don't skim, do we?
Do for Leviticus.
Oh, we're definitely not skimming Leviticus. We're going to read every single law.
Oh.
Should we? Yeah, we should read every single law. Because there's some duplicates, but we're going to read the whole thing.
Right.
Read the whole thing.
I look forward to the next 5 years of my life.
Dan, where are we at so far in the Joseph narrative?
Well, let me tell you, we're in chapter 45.
Mm-hmm. And what happened previously up to this point?
Well, let me tell you. Okay, so Joseph was trying to determine if his brothers had had a change of heart or if they were going to give Benjamin up to save their own hides, if you will.
Basically, yeah. And they don't know who Joseph is yet, which is odd, because Joseph knows who they are.
Yeah, right.
Which we'll talk more about later this chapter. But we're at the turning point where Joseph has tested his brothers. He's realized that they've changed. They're better people now. And he's about to reveal himself.
Or at least Judah is, right?
Well, it seems that way because Judah talks for the group.
Yeah, right. I mean, did he get in a huddle and say, okay, here's the deal. We're going to sacrifice. You know?
Right.
Or did he just go, I'm going to talk for myself. I don't know about these guys, but I feel bad.
Yeah, isn't that the interesting thing is we don't actually hear from the other brothers.
Right.
We have to assume that Judah speaks for the whole group.
Right.
And that they're all in unity.
Why does he speak for them? I mean, he's not the oldest.
He's not the oldest, but he's not nearly close to the bottom either. I'd have to look at the genealogy again to see who was the second oldest son. Because I don't recall anymore.
I think it was Simeon.
Yeah, because Reuben was the oldest.
Right.
It might have been Simeon and Levi next.
Yeah, and then Judah, he was like somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, I think he was.
Yeah.
Anyways, it's not. I don't think it's critical to the narrative, so we won't look it up now.
I didn't say it was. I was doing something else.
That's right. So let's read verses 1 and 2.
All right.
And get into it.
No.
Well, it says verse 2, but it's verses 1 and 2.
Oh. All right. Then Joseph could not restrain himself before all those who stood by him, and he cried out, "Make everyone go out from me." So no one stood with him while Joseph made himself known to his brothers, and he wept aloud, and the Egyptians in the house of Pharaoh heard. Is it really necessary to mention that everyone heard him? I still kind of think it's cry so much after causing your brothers so much grief. I mean, this, I get that they tried. Right, I get that.
They really did.
I get that. And so he wanted to toy with them, I get that. But now to weep so loudly that everybody be hearing him, Joseph seems conflicted, is what I would say, and vindictive. But again, I mean, I know they tried to kill him, all right? But that was like 22 years ago, and now he's living it up.
He's doing pretty well.
I mean, are you trying to tell me, here's my question, would he have preferred to have had that not happen to him?
That's a really good question. Yeah, despite all the trouble he went through.
Right.
Would he now look back and say, well, I wish things had turned out differently?
Or would he say, I'm glad they're like they are because I am a boss?
From my reading of the text, I actually think that would be true. I think he would say, yes, this is a better outcome than had I not been betrayed by my brothers and sold as a slave into Egypt. But that's just my reading of the text.
Mm-hmm.
I have no basis to ground that on.
He'd probably say that just because he knows it was God's plan.
Right, exactly.
And therefore God's plan is always better than ours.
Right. And the other thing too is if you take God out of it, then you have no way of knowing, right? So if he didn't believe that God set this whole thing up, well, he has no way of knowing that he would have lived a terrible life. Like imagine he hadn't have been raised up to be second in all the land. Well, I mean, the truth of the matter is he might have been happier back home with his family and his people.
Maybe.
They were rich.
Were they?
Yeah, remember because they were so large and so well off that the Shechemites were like they were getting their money bags ready to join forces with them.
Yeah, but them Shechemers were probably pretty tiny.
Yeah,
also you have to remember that during the famine, all their money didn't get them squat. So it's possible that without Joseph, like say if Joseph was still just one of the brothers, they could have all died.
Yeah, it is possible. It is possible, yeah.
He might have saved their lives.
Yeah.
And that's true.
It is true. I want to touch on you raised a question earlier and we kind of moved past it already, but why is it necessary for him to cry so loud that the other Egyptians hear him crying?
Yeah.
That's a wild scene when you think about it. 'Cause I don't know how loud, like how loud do you cry?
I try not to cry very loudly.
Right. I'm not
like that.
Like that?
Yeah.
I'm more of like a silent crier. Like you wouldn't even know I'm crying unless you were looking at me. So like I'm curious, is the crying a little bit performative?
If it is, I don't know why he would need to do that.
I mean, well, I can think of a couple reasons. Like, in the ancient world, there were some expectations of showing emotion. Right? So, for example, a lot of your emotions were exaggerated. When you approached a king or somebody higher than you, you would show your subservience to them, and you could go something as simple as just like bowing your head or bowing your knee. But some people, if it was like the pharaoh or a king, they would go the extra mile. They would lay completely prostrate on the floor and say something like, I am your servant at your feet, the dirt between your toes. The craziest things, right? Because they're trying to go over the top in demonstrating their loyalty and their subservience to this individual. But there was the same thing in other areas of life too, like when somebody died. The mourning rituals for when people died were unbelievable. Like people would pay other people to come in and wail and cry and make a scene, because if you didn't make a scene at the death of your loved ones, it was perceived as though you were bad relatives to them. Right? So there were some, like, I think some performative parts of the culture in which when you had a particular emotion, that emotion tended to be a little bit over the top. What I don't know is if this is one of those things. Was he expected to have like a really deep emotion at this particular uniting, or was he literally just an emotional dude?
I think he was probably an emotional guy.
You think he was?
He seems kind of, I don't want to say weak, but more in touch.
Yeah, I get that. Well, I don't know if there's an answer to that, but I like your answer.
Oh.
I think the story can read easily with just Joseph is overwhelmed with emotion. I don't know if it's necessarily a performance, because who would he be performing for? Right.
If anything, he would want to try to not do Egyptians, right? Because he would look weak, I presume.
Yeah, that's a good point. In his particular position, would he appear to be weak if he cried out loud in front of the other Egyptians? He might be. Yeah. Anyways, I had a question. Tell me what you think. I want to know what would have happened, because remember, up to now, Joseph is testing his brothers to see if they have changed, right? Okay, so what would have happened if he tested his brothers and they hadn't changed?
Well, see, that's a good question. I think he would still want to try to figure out how he could bring Benjamin over there, and maybe his father too. But it's a good question about what he would have done. I mean, he must have had some idea because he had an entire plan based on trying to figure out the answer. Therefore, he must have known what he's going to do if he got the wrong answer. But I don't think he would have a heart to put him in jail or whatever, you know?
Mm-hmm. I think so.
Yeah.
He might not have given them special treatment.
He'd probably just say, "Hey guys, look at me now, and I ain't helping y'all."
Do you think he would have punished them? Minus Benjamin. You know he's not going to punish Benjamin.
Probably not his father either, right?
Or his father, right? But do you think he would have punished them? Like, do you think maybe he put him to work?
No.
You think he's better than that?
I didn't say that. I just think that, no, I just don't think he's angry enough.
I think you're right. I don't think he is.
After 22 years, I mean, just like with Jacob and Esau, you know?
Yes.
Esau couldn't hold on to that anger.
I agree. And we're going to talk about that here in just a second. Let's read the next couple of verses.
Do it. All right.
Actually, you had some notes here that you...
Oh, yeah. So, all right. This is the previous chapter, 44, verse 33. Now, therefore, please let your servant remain instead of the lad as a slave to my Lord. Let the lad go with his... So, Joseph did this whole crazy plan just to see whether his brothers would lay down their lives for Benjamin, you know, whether they learned their life for Joseph. However, all I see is Judah showing signs for, which makes me wonder if Judah's story was embellished by the southern priests who were writing at the time, since Judah was kind of their guy that they rallied behind, you know?
Right.
Like Joseph was.
I agree with that sentiment. I the way I'm reading parts of these narratives is that the narrator is propping Judah up, because you have to assume during the story that the other brothers spoke, but they're not speaking in the story, right? And if part of this was to see if his brothers had all changed, you'd think he'd want to hear from like all of them, wouldn't he?
Yeah, and it's a long enough story that I think they could have added some more detail.
Right? How many chapters have we been on Joseph now? And we're still not done.
Yeah. It's crazy.
He takes up like a third of the, maybe 25% of Genesis, maybe. Right?
I doubt that.
Because it's almost 50 chapters.
Yeah, but what did it start at? 38 maybe?
Yeah, somewhere in there.
So 12. So how many times did 12 go into 50? 12, 24, 36, 48. Oh, crap. All right, whatever.
Anyways, so, I mean, there's a lot of stuff here. The brothers could have said something. I don't know why they didn't bother to tell us what they said.
Right. I mean, obviously, the narrator did.
I agree. Yeah, but they cared about what Judah said.
But I do wonder if that means there is a previous story somewhere that was written down, you know?
Right.
Where they were taking their material from. And they were just like,
I think there was, and we're going to touch on that near the end of this chapter. We're just going to briefly, again, go over something that might be a doublet.
Okay.
I think you noticed it already as well.
I noticed all the things.
Let's read the next section. I think it's verses 3 through 7, maybe? Yeah, it looks like, yep, Genesis 3 through 7.
No, 5 through 7.
I know it says 5 through 7, but it's 3 through 7.
Am I the one that did this wrong, or did you?
I added the rest of the verses because you didn't include all of them.
Uh-huh.
And the point is to talk about what the passage says, right?
Go every verse, even ones that are like...
Every single one. We read every single one because it's assumed. We can't assume everybody in the audience has got their Bible open reading along with us. Some people are driving in their cars, they're at work.
Yeah, all right, fine.
Man.
All right. Then Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Does my father still live? But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed in his presence. And Joseph said to his brothers, please come near to me. So they came near. Then he said, I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. But now do not therefore be grieved or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For these 2 years the famine has been in the land, and there are still 5 years in which there will be neither plow nor harvest. And God sent me before you to preserve a posterity for you in the earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance.
Yeah.
I assume you're going to have a lot to say about this, predestination and all. Does God use all things for good? Does he take the bad and make it work according to his divine plan, or does he just orchestrate the whole thing? I don't know. I mean, even if God did use bad for good, how would that even happen? Does God eventually have to intervene in some way or another to ensure his plan stays on track?
Yeah. So remember what Joseph said there. He said to preserve your posterity. As far as I can tell, Joseph is hinting that God has preserved them because he really doesn't have any other choice. He has to preserve the people of Israel because he promised that they would become a great nation or many
That kind of
nations.
sounds to me as though if Joseph wasn't in this, then they would have died from the famine. Then.
That's right. If Joseph was not in this position, would they have all died from this famine?
Seems like what he's insinuating, right?
It could be true, but listen to this. All right, let me posit a question. Can we be sure that they would have died from the famine? Because if it's true that if they had not gone into Egypt, they would have died in the famine, well, that must have also been true about everybody living in the land of Canaan. But we know that not every single person in Canaan died, right?
Right.
So I'm sure there's some people that didn't survive the famine. It's hard to say how many. But one thing I don't know is a well-connected, well-off family like this, would they have been able to find a way to survive? And I don't know, but I'm inclined to believe that they would survive, but it's 7 years, man.
I mean, maybe they'd survive, but they'd have to maybe sell off and eat off like all their livestock and just become a lot worse for it.
Sell all their daughters as slaves and things like that.
Except for Dinah.
Yeah, except for Dinah.
She's staying with.
She doesn't have any value. She's already been great. She's already been taken advantage of.
Very sad.
Oh boy, I'm laughing at her. Anyways, so
yeah, we'll edit your laughter out. It will make it sound like tears.
Exactly. So, did this need to happen? Like over the course of history, was it a requirement for God to do this? I kind of lean towards yes. What do you think?
I'm surprised you said yes. I thought you would have said no.
Oh.
Why did this need to happen?
Well,
I said because they could have died, but you're telling me that they wouldn't have.
That's a good point, because I think God wants to preserve all 12, and it's possible that not all 12 would have survived.
Okay.
Maybe some of them could have perished. Maybe some of them might not have perished, but they would have had to move to another land and break up the family, right? It seems like in order to make them to fulfill what God actually wanted, he needed to keep the families all together in their tribal units, which means whatever they're doing, they need to be doing it together. That makes sense. Although it's unfortunate that they're all going to become slaves together soon.
Yeah.
But there's a reason for that. We're going to touch on that soon.
Yeah. So,
yeah. Go to your next question. Yeah.
Right. So obviously this all leads to them becoming slaves, which is ridiculous because if Joseph hadn't done this, of course the Israelites would not have become. So it's like, was it part of God's plan for them to become slaves? And if so, well, it says that they became slaves because like they were being punished. But then of course I would have to ask, what did they do? And I'm pretty sure somewhere else came to the realization of.
Oh. I don't know if you wrote it in the notes, though.
It might have been a different chapter.
I think it was.
I'm going to tell you right now, all right?
Yeah, tell me, what's your answer?
I think the reason they're punished is because, yes, they were, invited into Egypt so that they would, not die in the famine and do all right or whatever. But they never really returned to Canaan, right?
Yeah, we talked about that
That
previously.
was the promised land. They're like, we're good. We're just going to chill over here in Goshen.
They should have come back
Right.
after the famine.
Yeah.
And I think that ties in perfectly with what we're about to read in Ezekiel. But remember also, in Genesis 15, this was foretold to Abraham. It says, then he said, that being Yahweh to Abraham, know certainly that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, and will serve them, and they will afflict them for 400 years. And also the nation whom they serve I will judge. Afterwards, they will come out with great possession. So God knows ahead of time in the biblical account that this is going to happen.
God
which
knows everything.
Right. He knows it. I don't know if he specifically wants this to happen, but he at least knows that it's going to happen. Now, the why did it happen, I think we can find maybe a hint in Ezekiel. Ezekiel is one of the few prophets, other than Jeremiah, that really go to town in the first couple books of the Bible. Jeremiah and Ezekiel.
They go to town?
Yeah, Jeremiah and Ezekiel quote from the Torah a ton.
Oh.
Or they give you a lot of like Torah adjacent sayings. So Ezekiel he reads some interesting things out of the Torah, and I think he might be giving us an answer for why they were slaves. Now, I'm going to need you to buckle up because there's going to be some things that are not work appropriate. And if you're listening right now at work, you want to put earmuffs on or headphones, or because there's some things that are going to happen. Ezekiel 23 verses 1 through 3, God is starting to talk about the rebellious history of the people. And he says,
of the Jews.
Yeah. It says, the word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, there were two women, daughters of the same mother. They became prostitutes in Egypt, engaging in prostitution from their youth. In that land, their breasts were fondled and their virgin bosoms were caressed. There's more to it, but I cut a lot of it out. If you go down to verse 8, he continues, she did not give up the prostitution that she began in Egypt. When, during her youth, men slept with her, caressing her virgin bosom, and poured out their lust upon her, therefore I delivered her into the hands of her lovers, the Assyrians, for whom she lusted. They stripped her naked, took away her sons and daughters, and killed her with the sword. She became a byword among women, and punishment was inflicted on her.
What's a byword?
The byword is when somebody passes by something and they just mutter a common phrase.
Meaning?
Let's see, what would be a common byword? Well, it's kind of like if you walk by a car crash and you're like, well, don't drink and drive.
Oh.
Or
This
even
is like a little bit of an example.
Or even better yet, when you go by one of those road sign, those memorials on the side of the road where somebody was like struck by a car.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, pay attention while you're driving, or you hit pedestrians. It's just something you utter about a common phrase that you would utter about somebody in the past. But typically, it refers to something in a negative sense, right? Basically, he's just saying that you're going to be relegated to nothing but a byword in the past. You're going to be snuffed.
Maybe relegated to an example, something you shouldn't do.
Yeah,
Maybe that. Okay,
that's perfect. I'm glad you said that because the words weren't coming to me. The last bit of Ezekiel 23. He says, yet she became more and more promiscuous as she recalled the days of her youth.
I mean, she's dead.
No, not yet.
But no, it took away her sons and killed her with the sword. Am I wrong?
I know, but this is just this is bombastic language because the Assyrians did not wipe out all of Israel.
Oh, they didn't kill her?
The Assyrians wiped out the 10 northern tribes, and there's still Benjamin and Judah left standing afterwards. So after the Assyrian invasion, what's left of Israel is who he's talking about. says, yet she became more and more
Does
promiscuous.
she mean Israel?
Yeah.
So it's not an actual person.
No, it's
Well, it
Israel.
says right there, son of man, there were two women, daughters of the same mother.
Yeah.
So I thought we were talking about two women.
Sorry, I should have prefaced this. This is not about two women. This is about the nation of Israel.
Well, who are
About this is about Israel in the north and Judah in the south.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, and we're supposed to know that.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I should have started with that.
Yeah, I believe you.
Okay, so how about we just go from the top?
Okay.
Now that you know that it's not talking about two women, it's talking about two nations,
All right.
Israel and Judah. The word of the Lord came to me, son of man. There were two women, daughters of the same mother, and they became prostitutes in Egypt, engaging in prostitution from their
So
youth.
maybe it wasn't actual prostitution.
Let me read it.
All right.
It'll become clear. And in that land their breasts were fondled and their virgin bosoms were caressed. She did not give up the prostitution that she began in Egypt, when during her youth men slept with her, caressing her virgin bosom and pouring out their lust upon her. Therefore I delivered her into the hands of her lovers, the Assyrians, for whom she lusted, and they stripped her naked and took away her sons and daughters and killed her by the sword. She became a byword among women, and punishment was afflicted upon her. Yet this is further down. The new yet she is Judah now. Yet she became more and more promiscuous as she recalled the days of her youth.
Judah
when she was
became more promiscuous. I thought Judah was the good one.
No, Judah gets sent into captivity too.
Oh,
just not at the same time as Israel. It's separate of like 125 years.
I thought Judah was the one that was the golden boy.
Until they got sent to captivity.
Oh, that's weird.
Yet she became more promiscuous as she recalled the days of her youth, when she was a prostitute in Egypt. There she lusted after her lovers, whose genitals were like those of donkeys and whose emissions were like that of horses. So you longed for the...
Ew.
I know, right? So you longed for the lewdness of your youth, when in Egypt your bosom was caressed and your young breast fondled. Okay, so the imagery here is basically that when they were in Egypt, they were still rebellious. They were rebellious from beginning to end. So, according to the book of Ezekiel, he seems to be suggesting that even when they were in Egypt, they were going after other gods. That's what idolatry typically is referred to as, when Israel and Judah play the harlot. That doesn't mean they're sleeping around. It means that they're going after other gods. But Ezekiel at least is suggesting that they were engaging in idolatrous practices even while they were in Egypt, and I could see that.
Why do you say even while? That would be the place that would make the most sense to do that, since all the other Egyptians are doing that, right?
Well, that's the thing, is because in the text, in the first 5 books, especially not in the first 2 books, there's no indication at all that they were worshiping the gods of the Egyptians. In fact, during the Exodus, when Moses asked for permission to go out and make sacrifices and offerings, he says that our sacrifices and offerings would be detestable among the Egyptians. So it seems like maybe at least the people had some sort of like ethnic, religious, cultural boundaries while they were in Egypt, but I don't know, maybe not a good one.
Well, they would have been God believers. I want to call them Christians because that's just easiest, but
well,
you know,
everyone who believes in God isn't a Christian.
Yeah, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So the problem with this is it started with Jacob's 12 sons, right? So were they promiscuous, or was it just the ancestors, or you know what I mean? How long were they in Egypt before they became slaves?
I forget. Somebody once, the number sticks in my head. Somebody once claimed that it was 217 years.
Okay.
There is a way that somebody has come up with that number. I forget the formula they used to get to that number, but I've heard various suggestions as to, how many years it would have been. But my understanding is it would have had to been a little bit of time, because if you read the narrative, They didn't really get enslaved until they grew so numerous and
Mhm.
prosperous that the Egyptians believed that they would become a threat. But it must have been some time. I don't know how much time.
And then the people that had done all this stuff are already dead, but he's still making everybody else slaves, right?
What do you mean?
Well, you were saying there were a lot of promiscuous people.
No.
Okay. And, you know, they just kept getting worse and worse.
Mm-hmm.
But then those people died because nobody lived 217 years.
Yeah.
So by the time God decided to make them all slaves, I bet a lot of them who had been doing all these bad things were.
But they continued to do bad things. That's what Ezekiel's saying.
I mean, I doubt they all were doing, right?
Well, they weren't all doing bad things before either.
Okay.
All right. God never once, when he judges his people, says that every single one of them is wicked.
Okay.
He punishes the innocent alongside the wicked.
That's wrong.
That's collective judgment.
That's wrong.
He's judging a nation.
That's wrong.
I agree, but that's how it works.
Some of the good ones are probably like, why did I even bother? I should have been promiscuous too. Had some fun.
I know. That's why God over and over again says that he's gonna bring back a righteous remnant. And there's always this idea in the Old Testament that the righteous ones will endure the punishment, and the unrighteous will die among the wicked while they're in captivity. And so there's this idea that the captivities and the enslavements are purifying the nation, right, by getting rid of the wickedness and paying for the iniquities of their sin.
You're saying innocent people don't die, though, huh?
Well, that's what I'm saying. The text seems to suggest that the truly righteous people will be preserved.
They're like shielded.
Yeah, but it's not something that the biblical authors really go out of their way to say. It's something that you might really catch kind of between the lines. But we know for a fact that some righteous people obviously died, because when you go to war, not everybody in the military who's fighting is unrighteous. There had to have been somebody in the military that was righteous, that was, slain in the field of battle.
I mean, we don't know that, actually. It could be that all the righteous did not die.
It could be true. It could literally be true that God did preserve the righteous ones when he sent his people into judgment. It's a literal possibility.
I mean, he had to have, because we say God is love, but I think we also would agree that he's the foundation for justice, right?
He's supposed to be.
Right. So it can't have something like this that is clearly unjust.
Right, yeah, because even Abraham recognized, surely you wouldn't wipe away the righteous alongside the unrighteous, right?
Yeah, that's right. That was good on him.
Yeah, that was good for him to point out, but I have to assume at some point in time, and we'll get to it. I don't know if it's critical now, but I think he does end the lives of some people that were unrighteous. I'm sorry, the people that were righteous.
How do you figure?
Well, I mean, are we assuming that every firstborn among the Egyptians were all wicked?
Well, I think we're assuming that it doesn't really matter because they were babies.
Well, not all of them. It just says the firstborn, right? So anywhere from birth up to 85, right?
Is that right?
Yeah, as long as you were a firstborn, you were a firstborn, right?
Oh.
Now, I think it's implied by the narrative that it was probably referring to children, because it was payback for the Pharaoh telling his people to go out and kill the firstborn children.
Right, to try to kill Jesus, right?
No, that's Herod.
Oh, it's still a good point.
No, it's similar to the Herod narrative is supposed to be hearkening back.
Oh,
to
also that was in the New Testament.
Yeah.
Oh, so the Old Testament, yeah.
But at the beginning of Exodus, Pharaoh commands the killing of Hebrew baby boys, and so
why does he do that?
I mean, do you want to read?
No.
Okay.
I'm just
So
saying you can tell me real quickly.
well, he does so because he's afraid that the nation is going to continue to grow and to um become too powerful.
Could kill the women and stuff. They're gonna have the babies.
Yeah, you would think so. I mean, what verse was that where he commanded the killing of the babies? Let's just grab it real quick because I'm actually curious what it says that now.
All right, I'll pretend that I'm doing.
See what? We're definitely we're talking about death and semen emissions and things like that. It's never a good thing for YouTube. They're going to be censoring this thing pretty hard,
Especially if they're, size of a horses.
right? I mean, this is not a
Probably like a bucket.
So Exodus 1 has the beginning of the narrative. It says the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shifra and the other Puah, when you act as midwives to the Hebrew women, see them on the birthing stool. If it is a son, kill him, and if it's a daughter, she will live. Of course, he didn't really care. The women didn't really carry out a lot of the commands because they had some pity on them. But let's see why it says that Pharaoh wanted to do that. It says, now a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, look, the Israelite people are more numerous and more powerful than we. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, or they will increase. In the event of war, join our enemies and fight against us to escape the land. So, yeah, he was just afraid that they would grow too numerous. So he said, listen, midwives, if somebody gives birth to a boy, but really, you should be doing that if you really want to end, the procreation, you would do that to the mothers because you can't have any babies without women, right? And a lot of times a man would have like 4, 5, 3, I don't know, multiple wives and multiple children by each wife. I don't know. It's hard to say who would be the most effective. Would it be more effective to end the lives of the daughters or the sons? It's hard to tell. But either way, so Pharaoh wanted to end the lives of all these babies, and so God gave him payback when the plagues came, and he ended the lives of all the firstborn of the Egyptian males. And I only say all that to say this: I can't rightly assume that the 2-year-old Egyptian baby boy was like guilty of any sin.
Right.
Right.
This is not part of any of this, but the fact is that it's probably, I don't know. I'll think about it for later. All right.
Yeah, we'll talk about this later when Exodus comes up in a couple of weeks. So Genesis 45:8. Want to go into the next verse?
I guess. So now it was not you who sent me here, but God. And he has made me a father to Pharaoh. Wait. Okay. And Lord of all his house, and a ruler throughout all the land of Egypt. A father to Pharaoh. Interestingly, other translations also have him as father.
Yeah.
I suppose it's just a colloquialism. Though if that were true, I feel the Message's version would be different. And it isn't.
Yeah. So it is kind of a colloquial term. But there's something similar to it. So later God says to Moses that Moses will be a god to Pharaoh. Is this demonstrating that Pharaoh is this just a demonstration that Pharaoh is not significant as he thinks he is? That he thinks he's the top dog, but actually it is God who places people in power?
I think it's weird that God is capitalized.
Well, I mean, isn't that what you're supposed to do for names and titles and things like that?
Yeah, when it's the God. I assumed it meant that he was going to just be a god, like powerful or what have you. not turning into God.
Oh, you mean you're questioning why the New King James capitalized God when Joseph says, so now it was not you who sent me here, but God, and he has made me a father to Pharaoh. So I might not understand what you're saying.
Nice.
Because God sent Joseph.
No, I'm just talking about the Exodus one.
Oh, in Exodus. You were skipping ahead. We didn't read that yet. So
we did read that. You said it.
I mentioned it, but we didn't read it yet. So Exodus 7, verse 1
says,
so the Lord said to Moses, see, I have made you as God to Pharaoh, and Aaron your brother shall be your prophet.
I thought you had read it. That's funny.
So there's definitely like this indication in Exodus and Genesis where God wants to let the worldly powers know that, like, hey, as it turns out, you're not really in charge. And I don't know if this is playing into that, or if this is just kind of using a turn of phrase. You know what I mean? But to your point in Exodus 7:1, why is God capitalized?
Right.
Because I think it's a simile. He's saying, see, I have made you like God, which is referring to the God, right? So I think it's okay to capitalize that, but it's important to recognize that in Hebrew there's no capital letters.
Really?
None. In Greek there is, not in Hebrew.
Oh, well then how? You'd probably have to use like pronouns or something, huh?
Every time you see like a capitalized Lord or a capitalized God or something like that in the English translations, that's not in the Hebrew text. That's a translational, editorial note.
Oh.
Just like when you see the Messiah with the M capitalized, that's not in the text either. It's anytime you see Messiah in the Old Testament, it's not referring to the Messiah. It's just Messiah with a lowercase m. If you see an uppercase M in the Old Testament for Messiah, it's because a translator wants you to think that this is about the Messiah. He's putting his own theology into the translation.
Oh. Okay.
You see that in Daniel chapter 9, there's two Messiahs in like verse 24 and 26. And neither one of them say the Messiah. But a lot of English translations will literally translate it as the Messiah, even though it's actually just referring to two separate anointed people. One of them a priest and another one a later priest. But anyways, that's neither here nor there.
They're very far away from here.
I know, yeah.
All right.
Should we read verse 9?
Verse 9. Wait, so he has made me a father, Pharaoh. I still don't understand what that means.
I think he's saying he's a protective entity over Pharaoh, because if it wasn't for Joseph, the land of the Pharaoh may not have survived the famine. So Joseph being there is that of a protective father over the Pharaoh, guiding him during this time of trouble.
Would Pharaoh be okay with hearing this?
No,
He wouldn't.
I don't think so.
Okay,
he'd be pissed.
You're right.
Pharaoh would not be happy about this.
So who's he saying this to?
He's saying it to his brothers, right? So now it was not you who sent me here, but God.
Yeah.
Right? He's saying, hey, don't be mad that you betrayed me. God is the one who sent me here.
Hopefully nobody tells Pharaoh this then, right?
You would hope not. But he did send the other Egyptians away at the beginning of the chapter.
Okay.
So they're not in the room with them.
And the Pharaoh's not going to believe a bunch of Jews, right?
I don't think you... Well, I mean, you never know, but probably a bunch of Egyptians, you mean?
No.
Eavesdropping Egyptians.
Well, no, I mean if his brothers decided to tell Pharaoh.
Oh, you think his brothers would... I don't think his brothers would be that dumb.
Well, I'm just saying if they did, Pharaoh would be like,
If I had to guess, when they approach Pharaoh, they're going to bow low with their head to the ground.
Yeah, but I mean, still, it could get out. Okay.
Perhaps. It's a dangerous thing to say. You shouldn't say it.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm just like, why is he saying this?
Really kind of biting the hand that feeds you, literally.
It's really weird.
Yeah.
Saying I'm better than the Pharaoh.
Kind of is. Yeah. I think it's there because it's a theological statement.
And to be fair, though, he is better than the Pharaoh because
Yeah.
He's getting stuff done, and the Pharaoh's just twiddling his thumbs.
Yeah, Pharaoh didn't know what to do.
If you had an issue at this point, who would you go to, the Pharaoh or Joseph?
Joseph?
And sounds like he's in charge, huh?
He said, nobody will lift a foot in the land without your permission,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Verse 9.
Sure, hurry up and go to my father and say to him, thus says your son Joseph, God has made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me. Do not tarry. See, Lord isn't capitalized here because we realize it's not like a religious thing, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, the capitalized Lord in the Old Testament typically refers to Yahweh. So when you see the divine name, they put it in capital Lord, the Lord. Here it's probably just the word Adonai, referring. Actually, what does it? It could be Baal. Actually, Baal means Lord as well as Adonai, or Adon is actually more proper. He has made me Adon of all Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
We can check it real quick. I'm actually curious if it's Adon or if it's Baal, because sometimes people get called in the Old Testament, they get called a Baal, and you're like, wait, did he just call him an idol?
Mm-hmm.
But Baal actually means master as well.
Oh.
So it's a little tricky when you're doing the translation. But we'll find out real quick what it says.
Yeah, I hope that Pharaoh doesn't hear about this, right?
You definitely don't want.
Manifest destiny, God on earth, Pharaoh.
All right, I got the passage open. Yeah. So the word that they used here is Adon. So it says that he was made Adon. So he was made to be master.
Yeah.
Yeah. So really interesting, but yeah, there's no need to capitalize Lord here. What was your question now?
I didn't have one.
Manifest destiny?
No, that wasn't a question. That was a comment.
Oh. Yeah, it is interesting here. Yeah, we already talked about this. My note is redundant. Let's move on to verse 10.
All right.
I was reading my note. I was like, oh yeah, we already talked about that.
You shall dwell in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near to me. You and your children, your children's children, your flocks and your herds, all that you have. There I will provide for you, lest you and your household and all that you have come to poverty. For there are still 5 more years of famine. I'm curious how Joseph gets the power to just move a whole clan of people into the city just because he was high up in the government. Can you imagine that happening today? What if the vice president said she had a family in Mexico and was going to bring them and their children and their children's children all to America? Though I guess people weren't as afraid of immigrants back then, or rather, it took the Egyptians some time to develop their xenophobia.
Yeah. Well, the other thing too is if in fact the Pharaoh views Joseph as like a mini savior figure, because he, now in real life I don't think this is true, but in the narrative I think it is true. I think the narrator is trying to paint a picture that Joseph was kind of a savior, not just of his brothers, but also of Egypt.
Sounds like the North probably wrote that.
Certainly could be, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I learned.
But if that's the case, if Pharaoh did view him as being like this savior sent by God, who's going to help them withstand the famine, then I could see where he might be predisposed to being like, oh yeah, your family wants to come, go, let's move them on in.
Right.
Let's bring them up.
I recently learned that the Jews were sent to Goshen because it was pretty out there, like out of the way from Egypt. And as such would presumably quell the other Egyptians' anger, since the Egyptians were not big fans of some of their habits. So since the Jews were infiltrating Egypt and thus earning the ire of the Egyptians, I would have to wonder how well this plan. I mean, I suppose Goshen is still pretty close to Egypt, so maybe they still had to go there for work or something. I don't really know how any of that stuff worked. they like now we have a boss who pays us, but Jacob and the like just did their own thing with the land or something. Would they go into Egypt to find work or maybe to sell their goods?
They could actually. So
That was like 10 questions.
we have records from ancient Egypt
Mm-hmm.
showing that there were laborers that came from the land of Canaan, specifically to work in Egypt, whether it was cutting stone, whether it was working on building projects and things like that. So we knew that there was a need for labor, and they were importing people as cheap labor, especially during a time of famine. If it was a bad enough famine, you could import people. You can import people pretty cheaply, literally just sometimes for food rations. You can import large groups of people. In fact, they actually had housing set up. In the ancient Egyptian records, there's a number of blocks of housing that they've discovered where foreigners who came to work in Egypt could live separately from the Egyptians. Now, remember, if you skip ahead to chapter 46, we kind of get the answer to why they're in Goshen as well. It says, and the men are shepherds. This is what they're supposed to say to Pharaoh. He says, and the men are shepherds, for their occupation has been to feed livestock, and they have brought their flocks, their herds, and all that they have. So it shall be when Pharaoh calls you and says, what is your occupation? That you shall say that your servant's occupation has been with livestock from our youth even till now, both we and also our fathers, that you may dwell in the land of Goshen, for every shepherd is an abomination to the Egyptians. So it seems like being placed in Goshen does separate them from the rest of the Egyptians. That's kind of the point. And if that's true, if they were segregated from the Egyptians, then it seems to me like they wouldn't necessarily be drawing the ire, as you put it, of the rest of the Egyptians, because they'd be kind of in their own ghetto.
Yeah, in their own ghetto.
Well, ghetto didn't always have a negative connotation. I mean, it did eventually when they started putting Jews in ghettos. In Europe, that's when ghetto took on a really negative connotation. But yeah, they were placed in their own ward. Is that a better word, ward?
I don't know. So you think that maybe the reason God was upset was because they eventually did venture out from Goshen and intermingle with, no?
I don't know, because here's the thing. So in the passage we just read from the next chapter, they settle them in the land of Goshen specifically because they're sheep herders, and sheep herders are an abomination to Egypt.
Yeah.
Which is confusing because in 45:10, the Pharaoh literally says, you will dwell in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near to me. I'm sorry, is this Joseph speaking?
Yeah. I don't think the Pharaoh said anything ever. He didn't. The Pharaoh never speaks. So.
Yeah, so it is Joseph speaking when he says, you will dwell in the land of Goshen,
right,
and you shall be near to me, Joseph, you and your children, and your children's children, your flocks, your herds, and all that you have. There I will provide for you, lest you and your household and all that you have come to poverty, for there is still 5 more years of famine. There's one more. I'm trying to find where it is in this passage. All right, here it is. Going further in the passage, Pharaoh does speak. It says, Pharaoh said to Joseph, say to your brothers to do this. Load your animals and depart and go into the land of Canaan. Bring your father, your households, and come to me. I will give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you will eat the fat of the land. So I only bring that up because it seems interesting that they could segregate them in Goshen, but then in the same chapter, Pharaoh's like, bring all your family, I'll give you the best of the land.
Well, yeah, so I wasn't sure what that meant.
Right.
You know, because Goshen is kind of on the outskirts, right?
Right.
And I assumed the reason the Jews were okay with, well, they put them there is because there weren't many Egyptians there.
Right.
And if there weren't many Egyptians there, it's because the land wasn't great. Why would you have a really nice land and not do anything?
I agree. I think this is a plot hole in the narrative. And I think the reality of it is, it seems like a doublet. I think the spot where Pharaoh says, "Come," and you can bring your family and bring your relatives, and you can have the best of the land. I think that was part of a standalone narrative that was separate from the other narrative, where he says, where Joseph says, you guys are shepherds, you're detestable to the Egyptians, and you're going to be in Goshen because you're shepherds, basically.
Mm-hmm.
I think when they combined the narratives, they left both of those sections in there, and I think they oppose each other a little bit.
There are two reasons that they were in Goshen from two different stories.
Right.
So they said, we'll put them both in.
Right.
Yeah, it might not make sense, but, everybody gets their side in.
Yeah, I agree. Let's read verses 12 and 13, or 12 through 13.
Okay. And behold, your eyes and the eyes of my brother Benjamin see that it is my mouth that speaks. So you shall tell my father of all my glory and of all that you have seen, and you shall hurry and bring my father down here. Behold, huh? Is this where he yanks off his mask and reveals his true identity?
Well, behold is a pretty common word. It's just a more emphatic. But yeah, it is interesting because it does give you the Scooby-Doo feeling. Except that he's not gonna chastise them if it wasn't for you meddling kids and your dog or something. But it is weird when he says behold. Listen to what he says. Behold, your eyes and the eyes of my brother Benjamin. Wait, why is he singling Benjamin out as his only brother here? He says your eyes and the eyes of my brother Benjamin, really going out of his way to separate Benjamin here.
Kidding, yeah.
Now, the second half of the Joseph narrative, there are two prominent characters, Judah and Benjamin. And you never guess what? Those were the two southern tribes that were not part of the northern tribes that got wiped out by the Assyrians. They were basically the good guys that got left standing. Isn't that interesting that those are the two prominent characters in this narrative, or at least this part of the narrative?
I don't know if it's interesting. I mean, at a certain point, I don't think that the South can just write all sorts of fake things about them.
Right.
So it's likely that a lot of this did happen.
No, I agree. I'm just saying, I think the narrator carefully selected what parts he kept in the story. And he wanted to retain the parts that were favorable towards the southern tribes.
Well, yeah. Right. I think the reason he said of my brother Benjamin was because that they are actually full-blooded brothers.
They are. I agree. That's the second half of the answer, which is Benjamin, according to the narrative, is his only real full-blooded brother. But it just seems interesting that Joseph is putting a distance between the one brother and the rest of the brothers. Because I've got half siblings, right? But I've never viewed my full-blooded siblings as being different than my half-blooded siblings. We're just all siblings, right? Isn't that interesting?
But I'm sure he must have.
Yeah, he must have, especially because
there's 27 different, wives, concubines, what have you.
Yeah.
To have something in common with the one is probably a big deal, right?
Yeah, I'd say
Especially
so.
Since it's Rachel, chosen wife.
Yes, the one he actually wanted.
Yeah.
And then couldn't have kids, didn't really live all that long.
I mean, Jacob was probably pampering Benjamin as well as Joseph. So they probably felt like they were set apart.
Could you imagine what would have happened if, and this is off topic now, but what would have happened if Jacob had not been given the other sister first? Because if it wasn't for the other sister, there'd be two sons by Rachel And how many sons were had by the handmaid of Rachel?
I don't know. A lot.
Anyways, there wouldn't be 12 tribes, is what I'm saying.
I don't know about that. Maybe they would just have more children in different ways.
Maybe.
I mean,
is having 12 tribes important, though?
Apparently, according to this, it is.
it seems important.
I mean, he could have just had more concubines.
Yeah, he definitely would have had more
like,
concubines.
I mean, that's basically all Leah was anyway.
Yeah.
Right? So
basically, yeah.
I think she could have been replaced easily.
Yeah, she was definitely basically a concubine.
Right. Yeah. So
except that a higher ranking concubine above her own concubine.
Right. Yeah.
Either Zilpah or Bilhah.
Not above Rachel, right?
Right.
So,
Right. But I mean, if you ask Rachel though, Rachel felt like she was superseded by her sister.
I know.
Is it not enough that you stole my husband that you also steal my son's mandrakes?
Yeah, it's sad.
All right. Should we read the next verses 14 and 15?
Okay.
Do we have more on Behold?
No, I don't think so.
No, there's only so much to bite off there.
Then he fell on his brother Benjamin's neck and wept, and Benjamin wept on his neck. Moreover, he kissed all his brothers and wept over them. And after that, his brothers talked with him. Let's see. Joseph was in Egypt for 22 years.
Basically.
And left when Benjamin was, I think we determined, between 10 and 12. That's what we determined, just nod your head.
I actually don't recall anymore.
It was 10.
He was young.
We said
he was young.
10 to 12.
Okay.
That's what we would determine.
I'll buy it.
All right. So what are the chances Benjamin would be really emotional about this reunion?
That's a good question, because it says that he fell on his brother's neck and wept, and Benjamin wept on his neck.
Yeah.
So he had to have been old enough to have fond memories with his brother. But to be fair, like, let's say he was between 10 and 12, right? I've got fond memories of my siblings since we were, since that age. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's inconceivable that he wouldn't be emotional discovering that his long lost older brother was in fact found. But I don't know if it would be as emotional for him as it would have been for the older brothers, especially because the older brothers had all that guilt.
Oh yeah, right. So he could just be happy. The other brothers are like, oh crap, he's alive.
Yeah, so that's the thing. At this point, let's imagine the whole group of them are now just a big sobbing mess, which is somewhat likely. I'm assuming that Benjamin is crying out of happiness, and the other brothers is got to be a mix of happiness, but also, oh, thank God he's not actually dead, and we're off the hook somehow.
Right, yeah.
God's not gonna punish us for this after all.
Right, a lot of relief, tears.
There's got to be some tears of relief. Now, on the matter, because we've heard this before. When I read it again, when it said he fell on his brother's neck and began to weep, I was like, oh yeah, we've heard this before, and we're gonna hear it again. Remember Genesis 34:4? It says, when Esau ran to meet him, he embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. So the reunion was the same. And then we get the same thing again in chapter 46, what seems to be another repeat. It says, so Joseph made ready his chariot and went up to Goshen to meet with his father, Israel. And he presented himself to him, and he fell on his neck, and he wept. He fell on his neck and wept on his neck.
Right.
A good while.
Right.
And then remember the story of the wayward son?
Yeah.
In the New Testament, who eventually finds his way back home, and then as he's walking home, his father runs out to meet him. It says in Luke chapter 15:20, he arose and he came to his father. But when he was still a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. This seems to be like a really common, I don't want to use the word trope, but it's a common image in the biblical period, isn't it?
Yeah.
But it is interesting. This only seems to happen with male family members that we've read. I don't think there's an instance I can think of where a female, of course, there's only so many females in the narrative because it was all written by men.
Right.
But I can't think of a single point where a woman became emotional and fell on somebody's neck and wept and wailed out loudly so that the other Egyptians would hear them and things like that. It's kind of an interesting scene, you know. I don't have a larger point that I wanted to make about that. I just found it is interesting that phrase keeps showing up.
It was 20 years that Joseph was away, right?
Yeah.
How many years was it that Jacob was from Esau? I thought that was 22 as well.
Jacob and Esau?
Yeah.
Oh, how? Yeah, they were apart.
Right.
Probably roughly just a hair over 20 years.
Yeah.
Because remember when they left Padam Haran, he said, "I've worked for your father now for these 20 years, and he's changed my wages 10 times or something like that."
Right. I thought we had mentioned it was 22 as well.
It could be.
So I thought it was a weird coincidence.
That really is. You know, we should go back and we don't have time for it now, but between this week and next week, we should go back and see how many years Esau and Jacob were separated. Because, boy, what an interesting coincidence it would be if it was the same amount of years as Jacob and his brothers. Wouldn't that be interesting?
It would be.
I think that's worth looking into. We're going to look into that between this week and next week.
All right.
I'm glad you brought that up.
No,
Let's read.
Nope. There's more.
Oh, there's more. What I
look
missed?
at this. So he fell on his brother Benjamin's neck and wept. Moreover, he kissed all his brothers and wept over them. And so at that point, he's acknowledging that they're all his brothers. You know?
That's true.
So
that's true.
I don't know. I mean, at least, well, first, the narrator is the one saying this, right?
Yes.
So it's possible Joseph never thought, oh, yeah, they're my brothers. I'm going to kiss them, you know?
It's hard to tell how this all played out.
Whether Joseph is doing, you know, what Joseph did and what the narrator thinks that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, to what point is the narrator adequately describing the situation? How many details are left out? How many details were retained only for subliminal purposes?
Yeah, right.
It's hard to tell. All right, 16 through 20.
Now the report of it was heard in Pharaoh's house, saying, Joseph's brothers have come. So it pleased Pharaoh and his servants well. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, say to your brothers, do this. Load your animals and depart, go to the land of Canaan. Bring your father and your households and come to me. I will give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you will eat the fat of the land. Now you are commanded, do this, take carts out of the land of Egypt for your little ones and your wives. Bring your father and come. Also do not be concerned about your goods, for the best of all the land of Egypt is yours. You know, I forgot that the Pharaoh had actually said something.
Yeah.
They keep mentioning him so much, but he's nowhere to be seen.
Pharaoh is often just third person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the Pharaoh is saying this, but just prior to this, Joseph had already given the land of Goshen to his family. Goshen wasn't that great. I mean, it was on the outskirts of Egypt. I mean, if it was that great, as I said, it would already be in use. So
I agree that this is kind of incongruent with the narrative. Pharaoh is saying, hey, I'm giving you the fat of the land, you know, but then kind of, you know, in reality and like in real life, it's more likely that Goshen wasn't heavily inhabited by the actual Egyptians, and it's possible that there's a economical reason for that. You know what I mean? The fact of the matter was they were segregated from the Egyptians proper in Goshen.
Yeah.
So it could. What if it's both true though? What if it's true that Goshen was in fact still a lush, you know, good land that could be, you know, populated, but it just hadn't been populated yet
because the Egyptians didn't do all that shepherding, right?
Yeah, and maybe it was perfectly fine land, but the land was more habitable for shepherding than it was for farming.
Yeah.
And so they just didn't have any reason to really occupy it.
So the Egyptians didn't eat meat, or what?
Oh, they did consume meat, but they had a different set of guidelines as to which animals they could eat, how they ate it, different things like that.
So were there Egyptian shepherds?
Oh, there definitely would have been, but they would have been segregated from part of society as well. But even still, yet the Egyptian shepherds would have had a lifestyle different than the Hebrew shepherds. Like they still wouldn't be wearing animal skins and things like that, which was
But
kind of a
would they have
problem.
had a reason to use Goshen?
They might have. It's possible that there were some Egyptian shepherds in Goshen. We're not told.
Right. Just thinking.
We could look through archaeology and find out.
Oh boy.
But yeah, to your point, it's odd because in the very next chapter we're told that they're placed in Goshen simply because they're like dirty, stinky, abominable shepherds, right?
Yeah.
So this section of the text I feel is a doublet
Okay.
with what we read in the next chapter. I think there were basically two narratives that described them going to Goshen. And one of them is probably described as, well, you need to go there because you're dirty and unclean. And the other might have been more positive,
Gotcha.
just saying, hey, Goshen's a really great land. I love Joseph so much that I'm going to bless his family with this awesome land.
Mm-hmm.
But then the southern tribes, which were heavily affiliated with being shepherds, their narrative was less positive of Pharaoh. And painted this animosity between the shepherding people and the people of Egypt. And to be sure, the southern tribes were the closest ones to Pharaoh, to Egypt. And there were incursions between southern Palestine, as we call it now, or southern Israel before it was Israel. Where like the Bedouins were, or where Moses' in-laws came from. There were incursions between Egypt and people who lived in the lower Levant. There was a tenuous relationship, especially because the people that lived close to Egypt were, for the most part, shepherding people. There's not a lot of farmland, really good farmland at all, in the southern portion of the Levant. So
They were shepherding people? What does that mean?
I mean, the people that lived there were shepherds.
Oh, they weren't shepherding people instead.
Yeah, Egypt's immediate neighbors on the other side of the border were literally shepherds, which they hated.
Well, I know, but I thought you meant shepherding people like slaves or something.
Oh no, I didn't mean that. All that to say this, it would make sense if the sections of this narrative where it paints like this animosity between the shepherds and the Egyptians.
So the southern shepherds, they were not a fan of the Pharaoh.
Oh, I don't think they were at all, and I don't think Pharaoh was a fan of them.
Okay.
Right?
So that's why they'd want to make it look like the Pharaoh had done them bad.
It kind of, I would think so,
And
but
the North doesn't really care about that, right?
Well, they might care less. I don't know, but again, this is all speculation.
Well, that's
like
what all this is.
Somebody with a PhD might have a solid opinion on this. I'm just speculating.
Well, I'm not. I'm getting down the facts.
I'm just trying to figure out why there seems to be two different reasons for the settlement in Goshen.
If this was actually how it happened, where they're like, all right, thanks, Joseph, that's great. And then they meet the Pharaoh, and he's like, hey, I'm going to give you land, and they're like, oh, okay.
Right.
Cool. Yeah, cool. Never been given land before. This is nice. This is new. Appreciate it.
Right, yeah. Last time we took over land, we had to kill all the male inhabitants of the cities and take their wives and children. It'd be nice to get it for free.
A little easier.
Let's read verses 21 through 22.
Then the sons of Israel did so, and Joseph gave them carts, according to the command of Pharaoh, and he gave them provisions for the journey. So that one is kind of saying that the pharaohs was the actual one, you know?
Actually, before we finish this, I had one more thing.
All right.
On the previous, notice in the previous passage, it says, take carts out of Egypt for your little ones and your wives, and bring your father and come, and do not be concerned about your goods, for the best of all the land. It seems to me like the Pharaoh like must have known a bunch of them were coming, right? Can we? I think that's. I just want to point that out because this is going to become, as we keep reading the story, I think Pharaoh and Joseph are both expecting not just a couple of them to turn up. They're like the entire household is turning up and living there.
What, 70 people?
Well, there's two numbers given in the Bible. One is 70, one 75. I think 75 is probably the real number, and 70 is a textual imitation that somebody made, which we can discuss later.
Well, it's always imitations, you know?
Yeah, the problem is at some point in time, one of the early scribes, there was either the text was changed to 70, or Deuteronomy chapter 32 verse 8 was modified because, well, we're going to waste a bunch of time talking about it, but there's a connection between the 70 people who went into Egypt and Deuteronomy 32, where it talks about the nations being divided up according to the sons of Israel. There's some textual variants. It says sons of God in most translations. It says according to the angels in Greek. But if you read the Aramaic Targums, it says literally according to the 70 angels.
Sorry, imitation is not a word.
Yeah, it's when you amend a text.
How do you spell it?
EMENDATION.
Process of making it up.
Yeah. So, anyways, I think it's interesting here.
Well, like to amend something.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Got it.
Yeah. Exactly. We just read 21 and 22. I stopped you halfway.
Yeah,
Sorry. Go ahead and read it.
All right. Then the sons of Israel did so. Joseph gave them carts according to the command of Pharaoh. He gave them provisions for the journey. He gave to all of them, to each man, changes of garment. But to Benjamin he gave 300 pieces of silver and 5 changes of garments. A whole family of people never learn any lesson. So now Joseph is treating Benjamin all special, just like Jacob did to him.
Yep.
I sure hope his brothers have gotten their bloodlust out, otherwise Benjamin might be next. According to the internet, 300 pieces of silver would be about 3,000 American dollars. I know the brothers aren't going to die and are probably relieved, but still, it's not exactly chump change, you know?
Yeah.
And 5 garments, all rainbow colored, I presume.
Could you imagine if Joseph gave Benjamin a Technicolor Dreamcoat like he had?
Yeah.
It's baffling to me that he is treating Benjamin in this way, especially after he already gave Benjamin 5 servings at the meal that they had as a 5 times the amount of servings that everyone else got.
Mm-hmm.
What is the purpose? What is Joseph trying to do? Unfortunately, this is one of those parts of the story where the narrator never resolves the lingering questions.
Yeah.
The narrator assumes that we know. I don't know.
Right.
The only thing I can assume is that it's a statement about a later statement about the tribe of Benjamin. You know what I mean?
Nope.
Or it's just a statement that Joseph is as bad as his father was, and thinks playing favorites is okay. And since he's his only full-blooded brother, it's his prerogative to play favorites.
He's probably not playing favorites. He probably really does love Benjamin.
What if it's another test? What if he's like, I don't buy it. I want to keep testing him.
Yeah, we'll see if Benjamin wakes up dead tomorrow.
Right. Yeah, what if he's just not completely convinced yet?
Right.
He's like, I'm gonna keep pushing these buttons.
Yeah. I mean, that could be it.
That could be it.
Yeah, because I don't know what else it would be.
Yeah, I don't know. I can't make anything of it. But what's he supposed to do with $3,000?
I don't know. I mean, is he going to go out and buy a car or something?
Well,
He's probably just going to give it to his father, right?
He's not going to go out and buy any bread or grain with it because they're in the middle of a famine. That's why they came to Egypt, right?
Mm-hmm.
If he really wanted to give him something, he should just give him more grain, which is what the money's going to go to pay for anyways, which, you know.
Well, if he gave him grain, then obviously everybody else would get some of it. And the brothers would probably not be jealous. They're like, that is a lot of grain. Obviously, it's for all of us. But with the money, they're like, some of that.
It's true. Money does carry well as opposed to grain.
Yeah.
Yeah. How many pieces of silver? 300 pieces?
Yeah.
Have you ever seen 300 pieces of silver?
I don't know how big a piece.
It's pretty small. It's like I'd say roughly the diameter of a quarter if it was smushed. But it could just be a drop. Sometimes silver was just weighed out in whatever chunks you could break it up into.
Okay.
So it really depends. Not all silver was formed so that it would be in a particular shape, right? Early forms of silver as payment was literally just the act of breaking off pieces that had the appropriate weight.
Now, how do they weigh things?
They had scales.
Did they?
Yeah.
Good for them.
But anyways, he had a full-on sack of just silver, I would imagine.
Yeah. So maybe it would just been like a little one. Baggy.
I don't know. I think it could be as big as maybe even a milk jug, depending on what shape the silver was in.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, dude's got a pretty good load of silver going. That's what I'm thinking. You know
It's
what I mean?
funny because now silver is worthless.
I mean,
Not worthless.
not in demand.
Yeah. I mean, it's not gold.
I mean, gold is
Bryce, you didn't give him gold, huh?
but they call it the gold standard.
Right.
But silver was the primary form of payment in the ancient world. Gold was you had to be a little higher up on the food chain to deal with a lot of gold. Mm-hmm. A lot of times it was reserved as well for the king and for the temple. So if there was gold in the land, the king would confiscate it.
How'd they know that there was a lot less gold than silver?
What do you mean?
Well, because gold was worth more, means they must have known it was rarer than silver.
Well, they were mining it.
Yeah, sure.
Right?
But
So if you've got 2,000 years worth of mining history, and you typically find more silver than gold, then you'll prize the.
What did people use if they couldn't afford silver?
Well, they had bronze as well. Bronze was a valuable metal, and then you could also barter with grain, with yarn. Yarn was very popular.
Now, bronze, is that worth anything now? I don't think so.
Oh,
right?
no, not really. I mean, it's basically, it does have some value. Bronze and brass do have value, but not as much as copper. But yeah, back in the Bronze Age, it would have been still pretty. Like if somebody gave you a bag of bronze, I mean, it's still a thing. Like you still got some money going on there. Because bronze was used for everything: swords, knives, utensils.
All right, what's after bronze then?
Iron.
So you would give people pieces of iron?
Yeah, well, see, the Iron Age was only valuable. The iron was valuable in the Iron Age in that it was really good for making utensils, instruments of war, things like that.
Okay.
It wasn't used necessarily as payment because you already had a system of using of other forms of payment that you could pay in frankincense and myrrh, though. I mean, it was just a barter system. Coins did not exist yet, right?
Well, I mean, in a way, but obviously if we're talking about pieces of silver, that's pretty much coins, just because they aren't stamped with the pharaoh's face.
Right, it's just a weight, a measurement by
Right.
weight.
Yeah.
Right. Anyways, yeah, dude's got a lot of bling bling going on right now.
Right. Yeah.
Let's read 23 through 24, and including your favorite translation, the Message.
Nice. And he sent to his father these things 10 donkeys loaded with the good things of Egypt, and 10 female donkeys loaded with grain, bread, and food for his father for the journey. So he sent his brothers away, and they departed. And he said to them, see that you do not become troubled along the way. So I really wasn't sure what that last part meant, troubled along the way. So I went for the one true translation called the Message. And here's what it says. Then he sent his brothers off. As they left, he told them, take it easy on the journey. Try to get along with each other. So he's telling them just to not argue with each other. What's the point of that? Is it because he knows he just put a large target on Benjamin's back?
So this was your suggestion is something that some Jewish rabbis have suggested over the years. But when I read the text in Hebrew, that wasn't the impression that I got. I got the impression from reading the Hebrew text that he was telling them to be safe along their journey and do not fear, because the journey was in fact dangerous. Anytime you journeyed, you would be dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it would be dangerous for you. So it might just be kind of a well wish along the way.
Like good luck?
Like good luck, stay safe, buckle up, safe travels, something like that. And I wanted to make sure that I wasn't, crazy in my thinking. So I looked at Gordon Wenham's commentary on Genesis. He says most often the term that's being used here describes fear, and it's used in Exodus 15:14 exactly as such. He says so many rabbinic commentators see Joseph encouraging them not to be afraid of robbers attacking the well-laden caravan, which is what I thought. He's got all this gold and silver, they're going to get attacked, right? Says he could also be encouraging them not to have second thoughts about returning to Egypt for fear of how they might be treated in the future. These different interpretations are not mutually exclusive. And I thought that was kind of I think that's a good summary of probably what's happening here. It's telling them to be safe, do not fear, and then make sure you actually come back here. Don't leave for a year and a half, like the last time when you left your brother in prison here for a year and a half.
Yeah.
Do not tarry, because remember he says do not tarry previously. So he says, go, do what you need to do, and get on back here.
Yeah. I mean, it would make sense for it to be, see that you do not become afraid. Right. In a way, basically saying God has your back.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's kind of what's happening here.
Then why does the Message say try to get along with each other?
Because it's not a real translation.
Well, it's something, isn't it?
It's an interpretation by a guy. I want to make sure I'm very clear about this. Who's not a linguist, and he's not really even a biblical scholar.
Well, what is he?
Eugene Peterson has the same level of biblical education that I have.
Okay.
And I defer to real biblical scholars when a translation is in question, because I've only had a couple years of Hebrew, but guys like Gordon Wenham and others have spent decades of their lives learning the ins and outs of the Hebrew language and things like that. Like my Hebrew professor, David Baker, he did his undergraduate degree 4 years in Hebrew, did his master's degree in Hebrew and Semitic languages, and then a PhD 6 more years.
Wow.
The dude spent 12 years learning like everything there is to know about Hebrew and cognate languages.
Man, I bet he speaks it pretty well, huh?
Yeah, you know what? It's a good question. I don't recall any conversations that we've had where he spoke in Hebrew. I know he did. Like, I know it happened, but I don't, like, I've been out of seminary for over a decade, and those conversations are now fuzzy in my memory. But I do remember one of my other Hebrew professors from undergrad who spoke it very, very well. Like, it was almost like it was just his second or first language. And the funny thing was, he didn't do his PhD in Hebrew. He did his PhD in Old Testament studies. He was just super smart. He was just really good with languages.
So I don't know if we would actually know how to pronounce these, right? Since we don't have anybody who's ever done it. We don't have a recording of anybody.
Yeah,
Right.
we don't have a recording. Yeah,
So we wouldn't actually know how it's supposed to sound, right?
We have a pretty good idea because remember we've got like the Rosetta Stone, and we have other bilingual and multilingual inscriptions from the ancient world that include Hebrew and Phoenician and other sister languages. And so, like for example, when we compare it with Greek, like a bilingual Greek inscription, actually that's not going to help you that much with the pronunciation. It's only going to help you with understanding what the word means. Yeah, you know what? There's a little bit of guesswork there. There must be, right? Because I can't think of a text. We do have some texts in ancient Akkadian and also in Aramaic from scribal schools where they talk, where there are texts that describe the language that they're writing in a little. But I don't know if there's any that specifically say this is how a word is pronounced.
Right. Yeah.
That's a question for another time. I have to do some digging on that one.
All right.
I'm curious. But I had one question.
Sure.
Okay. It says that he loaded up 10 different donkeys, right? It says he sent to his father 10 loaded donkeys with good things of Egypt, and 10 female donkeys loaded with grain, bread, and food for his father for the journey. I have a hard time believing that he needed 20 donkey loads of goods when the whole point of this was for them to turn around and come right back to Egypt.
Right.
That's insane. Wouldn't you say, like, here's what you need for the journey,
right?
Come on back, and then when you get back, I got a bunch of gifts for you, all the good things of the land.
Right.
Or was he doing this as a show to impress his father?
Probably. I mean, I think his father would still be hard pressed to really believe. Number one, that Joseph is alive, and number two, he's second only to Pharaoh. But if you bring all this stuff, it's going to be really hard to argue.
Especially because he's trying to convince his aged father,
right.
Not just to believe that he's alive, but to uproot his whole family and move to Egypt.
Yeah.
You need kind of a convincing argument for that, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that would probably do it.
Because it wasn't like you're just going to get in your car, drive across state, and be like, "Hey, I'm here to check things out.
Yeah.
I'm glad you're still alive." This is kind of a major travel situation.
Yeah, how long did it take to travel?
That's debatable, but if you're traveling with a whole clan of people, this trip could have been as long as 3 weeks.
Are these people walking?
Some of them would be walking, some of them would be on donkeys.
Well, I mean, are they on donkeys still walking at the same pace as people are walking? That made sense?
Yeah, so the people, if not all of them are on donkeys,
you'd have to go as fast as the slowest person, right?
Yes, exactly. A caravan can only go as fast as the slowest person. So, like, the women and children often would be on donkeys, and the men would be on foot. You know.
Did they have carriages yet, or?
Yeah, well, they sent carts. Remember, here it says
carts.
that they sent carts along for the children.
Are those like chariots?
Yeah, yes or no. They're not as fancy as chariots, but you have a basic idea.
You're right.
Yeah.
Drive them?
Well, you would hitch them up and they would be pulled.
Okay.
It's kind of like what you still see in like the countryside in Mexico. Have a donkey pulling a cart, which it's not something that's just in cartoons. You'll still see it in Mexico. It's wild. So something like that. So yeah, I think it was a pretty slow moving caravan.
Okay.
If it was just you or like you and one or two other people on donkey back, you might be able to make it pretty quick. But your whole family, a little bit different. Especially with children.
Yeah. You know what I think? I think that stuff like that would be scary. I'll tell you why. Because there was no or whatever. I mean, if you were hijacked or jumped or whatever, that's it, right? I mean, you could be left for dead even.
Nobody's coming to save you.
Right. So I have to presume that maybe they had, I don't know. Obviously they all had to have weapons, I guess, but I wonder if they had security they hired, or maybe Joseph sent some of the guards back with them, or I don't know.
It's hard to say because they're loaded up with gifts. Benjamin's got 300 pieces of silver.
Yeah.
Like they're sitting ducks waiting to be picked off.
You're telling me nobody sees them leave? And he's like, hey, guys, I'll load.
Right. Exactly. I agree.
Which is probably why he says, don't fear.
Right. I think that ties in pretty well. Yeah. Should we read the last couple verses here? 25 to 28?
Only 9 o'clock.
We've been here for 2 hours, huh?
Well, maybe we can do another chapter, huh?
I don't know about that.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to go to bed soon.
Hour and a half.
I'm an old man.
Yeah. Then they went up out of Egypt and came to the land of Canaan to Jacob their father. And they told him, saying, Joseph is still alive, and he is governor over all the land of Egypt. And Jacob's heart stood still, because he did not believe them. But when they told him all the words which Joseph had said to them, and when he saw the carts which Joseph had sent to carry him, the spirit of Jacob their father revived. Then Israel said, It is enough. Joseph, my son, is still alive. I will go and see him before I die. In my mind, I imagine Jacob or Israel finishing by saying, "Oh, and Benjamin, there's a new favorite son in town. He gets your room, and you can sleep with your brothers."
Yeah, this is an interesting passage. In the same passage, they refer to him as Jacob like twice, I think.
Mm.
And then at the very end, he's Israel again.
Right. So does that mean that this was added by the South, North, whoever uses that?
I don't know. But it's a funny passage because it says Jacob's heart stood still because he did not believe them. He's like, yeah, whatever, right? I think the next verse answers our question from the previous passage. But when they had told him all the words that Joseph said to him, and when he saw the carts which Joseph sent to carry him, then he believed. So it might be true that if Joseph did not send all these carts and provisions and donkeys back from Egypt, Jacob might not have actually been convinced. Definitely not convinced enough to uproot his whole family.
You just send like his signet ring with him.
Oh, that'd be a good idea. You could, just like when Tamar took the signet ring from Judah, right? Yeah, that'd be a very good way of identification. If we assume that Joseph had a signet that could be identified by somebody outside the kingdom.
Yeah.
It's hard to say.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting. But listen to Jacob's words. He says, I will go and see him before I die. Yeah. Which is interesting. Is he assuming that he's going to go and see him and come back, or is he assuming he's actually just moving there, like going, like permanently moving?
I mean, I don't think figure out what he meant by the company.
I know.
It certainly kind of assumes that he's just.
Yeah, see, that's the thing is, I think this is a situation where the English translation might be lacking.
Maybe we need to see what the message.
Right. All I'm saying is that I'm not entirely convinced that what's happening here is that Jacob is saying, I'm going to go for a visit. I think Jacob is pretty well convinced, because all the carts to carry the children, that the next step is to actually move into Egypt, because Pharaoh said, come, you can have the fat of the land, you can live in the land of Goshen. So I think when the translator put it in here, I will go and see him before I die, I think that's just, it could be worded better. I think if you read it in Hebrew, you would be led to believe that he's not saying he's going to visit. He's actually going to move there. It's just that in modern English, when we say we're going to see somebody, it means we're going to visit somebody. But I think what he's saying here is he wants to go and lay his eyes upon his son, one last time before he expires.
Right.
Right. That's what I think is being.
Yeah. So that doesn't really prove that he was going to go live there. World. Right. So I assume the assumption is that if he really is old, he probably does take 2 trips.
Right.
He
That's
doesn't want to just go there to see his son and then go back home.
Especially if it's arduous. Especially if your son is second in command and has charge over all this money and wealth and property. And imagine if you had a child and he won the lottery. He's a billionaire now.
Yeah.
And let's say he lives, in Cincinnati instead of where we live. They're like, hey, come live with me in Cincinnati in my new mansion, and I've got all these monies and gifts for you. You're like, shoot.
Yeah.
I'm retired. I only got a couple years left. Let's go.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the right decision.
Do we know how long he actually lived after this?
There is a timeline for when Jacob dies, and that's not until chapter 47, I think.
Yeah, because Isaac took a long time to die, right?
Yeah, because I think Jacob dies at like 147. Like he lives a while. But yeah, in the next 2 chapters, I forget which one, we're going to be told how old Jacob was when he passed away and what was happening when he passes away. So that answer is forthcoming soon.
Oh, I'm very excited. You tell I'm excited?
I can tell that you're incredibly excited. All right, well, I think that's all we have on this chapter, right?
I believe so. I don't have any more notes.
That's it, yeah.
Don't have any more verses. Unless you want to skip to the next chapter.
No, it's bedtime for me.
All right.
Guys, thanks for being here. We really appreciate you. If you think there's like there's some stuff left on the table that needs to be discussed, let us know. Throw it in the comments. We'd love to know your thoughts on some of these passages. And
I will personally answer each and every one of your comments.
That's right.
Probably not.
That might not be true. Don't lie to the audience.
Okay, I will look over them if I remember.
That's accurate. I'll do the same.
All right, cool.
All right, guys, thanks for being here, and we'll see you again next week.
All right, I love you. Bye-bye.